What if the quietest person in the room held the power to change everything? Barron Trump had spent most of his life under an unrelenting microscope. Every step scrutinized, every casual remark dissected by pundits, every silence interpreted as either arrogance or insecurity. The world believed it knew him, the youngest son of America's most controversial political dynasty, a name that carried immense weight whether he wanted it to or not. But on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday in late October, as the Florida humidity clung stubbornly to the air even after sunset, Barron did something so unexpected it would have made even the most seasoned journalists drop their recorders in shock. He walked into the Hope's Horizon homeless shelter on the industrial outskirts of Miami, not for a carefully staged philanthropic photo opportunity, not as part of some calculated PR strategy, but because of a single name scribbled in shaky handwriting on a coffee-stained napkin pressed into his palm 3 nights earlier by a trembling stranger outside a 24-hour diner. The name? Miguel Reyes. The napkin, stained with rings of cold espresso and what looked suspiciously like dried blood. The message beneath it? Just 4 cryptic words. He saved my life. Barron hadn't intended to follow up. He'd absent-mindedly stuffed the napkin into his Jeep's glove compartment that night, dismissing it as just another strange encounter in a life full of them, until the next morning, when he found it again, mysteriously stuck to an old gas station, receipt as if demanding his attention. Something about the encounter nagged at him, the raw desperation in the stranger's bloodshot eyes, the way his cracked lips had formed the words, "You're the only one who might listen," with such quiet conviction. Against his better judgment, Barron found himself driving to the address barely legible beneath the name, his GPS leading him to a squat, weather-beaten brick building with peeling mint-green paint and a flickering neon sign that buzzed ominously, its missing letters now reading Sanctuary Jose. Inside, the air hung thick with the acrid tang of industrial cleaner, barely masking the underlying sense of unwashed bodies and burnt microwave meals. A weary woman at the front desk barely glanced up from her dog-eared romance novel as he entered, muttering around a wad of gum. "Sign in if you're staying," before returning to her reading. Barron hesitated, his fingers hovering over the clipboard before scrawling Ben Thompson, the first alias that came to mind. He didn't know what he hoped to find. A man? A revelation? Proof that decency still existed in the world's shadows? Then, movement caught his eye. There, at a scarred folding table near the back of the communal area, sat a lean Latino man meticulously stitching up a torn backpack with hands that trembled slightly, but moved with practiced precision. He was older than Barron expected, mid-60s at least, with a face carved deep with wrinkles that spoke of hard years rather than easy laughter, and eyes that held a quiet intensity even as they squinted at the needle. Barron approached slowly, the worn linoleum creaking under his sneakers. "Miguel?" The man looked up, his salt and pepper eyebrows knitting together. "Do I know you?" Barron shook his head, suddenly feeling foolish. "No. But someone told me you saved their life." Miguel's expression didn't flicker. He shrugged, the motion making his faded Vietnam Veterans Alliance t-shirt stretch across bony shoulders. "Lots of people say that around here." Barron found himself sitting across from the older man without consciously deciding to. "Who was he? The guy who gave me your name?" Miguel's needle paused mid-stitch. "Tall, dark hair, military tattoos, and scars on his knuckles like he lost fights with barbed wire?" At Barron's nod, Miguel exhaled through his nose, a sound that wasn't quite a sigh. "James. Got here 3 weeks ago, shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. Withdrawal, paranoia, the whole 9 yards." He tied off the thread with a surgeon's knot and snipped it with his teeth before continuing. "I sat up with him 3 nights straight, talking him off the ledge. Got him into a rehab program up in Jacksonville last Tuesday." His calloused fingers smoothed the repaired backpack strap as he fixed Barron with a look that seemed to peel back layers. "Why do you care?" It was a fair question, one Barron had asked himself during the drive over. He could have walked away then. No one would have blamed him. The political blogs would never know about this detour into Miami's underbelly. But something in Miguel's gaze, the complete absence of expectation, the quiet resignation of a man who'd given pieces of himself to strangers for decades without ever being thanked, rooted Barron to that plastic chair. "Because," Barron said slowly, rolling the words like unfamiliar coins in his mouth, "I think you've saved more lives than just his." Miguel's laugh was dry as desert wind, the kind of sound that held no real humor. "Kid, I'm nobody. I mop piss. Off these floors at 3 a.m. I hand out stale sandwiches and moldy blankets. Sometimes I just sit and listen when everyone else has stopped." He leaned forward, the fluorescent lights catching the silver in his stubble. "You want a hero? Try the fire station down the street." But Barron wasn't looking for a hero. He was looking for something far rarer. Genuine, unselfish decency in a world that rewarded the opposite. And over the next hour, as the shelter's bustle faded into background noise, he got it in raw, unvarnished pieces. Miguel had been at Hope's Horizon for 12 years, since returning from his second tour as an army medic in Iraq with a head full of bad memories and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Before that, a foster kid who aged out of the system at 18 with a duffel bag of yellowing clothes and a GED he'd earned in juvie. No wife, no kids, no property beyond what fit in. His studio apartment's single closet. But he knew every resident's name, their traumas, their triggers, the small kindnesses that might keep them alive one more night. He'd talked gang kids into job programs, talked addicts through withdrawal shakes on bathroom floors, talked veterans out of putting bullets in their mouths. And he'd done it all without a single newspaper article, without any recognition beyond the occasional muttered, "Thanks, old man." Barron left that night with a promise to return, one he surprised himself by keeping. The next evening, he appeared with 2 overstuffed duffel bags of supplies, wool socks still in their packaging, travel-sized hygiene kits pilfered from hotels, even a box of Narcan nasal sprays he'd gotten from a nonprofit contact. No press release, no Instagram story, just Barron and Miguel sorting through donations in a storage room that smelled of mothballs and despair. "You don't have to do this," Miguel said as Barron stacked toothpaste tubes into neat rows. The older man's tone wasn't ungrateful, just confused, as if kindness from privilege was a language he'd never learned. "I know," Barron replied, not looking up from his task, "but someone should." Weeks bled together. Barron became a fixture, serving lumpy mashed potatoes in the cafeteria, scrubbing graffiti off bathroom stalls, sitting silently with a meth addict through the worst of her tremors. The staff stopped eyeing him like he might steal the silverware. The regulars started calling him B instead of "Hey Trump." And Miguel? He never treated Barron like a novelty or a paycheck, just a too privileged kid who needed to learn how. The other half survived. Then came the rainy November night that changed everything. A young woman stumbled through the doors just before midnight, soaked to the bone, her pupils blown black as oil spills, her fingernails digging bloody crescents. Into her own arms. "She's overdosing," Miguel said, already moving, his voice calm but his steps quick. Barron froze like a spooked deer as Miguel barked orders. "Naloxone! Now! And someone call 911!" And watched, heart hammering, as the older man brought her, back from death's doorstep with hands steadier than any surgeon's. When the paramedics arrived, one clapped Miguel on the shoulder like this was routine. "Good save, old man." Miguel just wiped sweat from his forehead with a frayed sleeve. Another night at the circus. Barron drove home through the storm with his knuckles white on the steering wheel, the wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. He'd grown up surrounded by power, by men who measured their worth in Twitter followers and super PAC donations, by women who treated kindness as currency. But Miguel, he measured his in the number of breaths he'd coaxed back into failing lungs, in the quiet thank yous whispered in dark corners by people the world had discarded. The next morning, Barron made a call, not to his family's publicist, not to some billionaire donor, but to a discreet estate attorney with a reputation for airtight anonymity. By week's end, Hope's Horizon had a new anonymous benefactor, one who paid off its $237,000 in back taxes, doubled its staff salaries, and endowed a 10-year operating fund. The only condition? Miguel Reyes would receive a salary matching a Fortune 500 CEO's, along with a simple bronze plaque in the lobby engraved with, "The quietest hero we never knew we had, because real angels don't need wings." When the shelter director called Miguel into her office to explain the changes, he sat perfectly still for a full 60 seconds, his cracked boots flat on the floor, his work-roughened hands limp in his lap. Then he turned to Barron, who'd been leaning silently against the filing cabinet. "Why?" Barron met his gaze without flinching. "Because the world doesn't deserve you." A beat. "But it needs you." Miguel shook his head slowly, but his eyes, those tired, beautiful eyes, shone wet under the fluorescent lights. "Kid, you're gonna make me cry." And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Barron Trump smiled. Really, truly smiled, without calculating who might be watching. "So tell me, who's the unsung hero in your life? The one who changes everything without expecting applause? Drop their name below. Let's start a revolution of recognition. And if this story stirred something in, you share it. Sometimes the quietest acts echo the loudest.